Like we did last time, in order to make the logistics work better for confession, we're going to do the reflection first. It's kind of backwards for what I would like to do, but I think it's best that people have the opportunity to go to confession, because I want to respect Father Rob's time and let him get out of here at 7:30. Otherwise, we kind of push it up to 7:30 and then run long. So I would like you guys to open your journals, go to the next page, the next spot, whatever you want to do. I had glasses. There we go. And in that spot, I want you to go, today is Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022. So you guys can write that there. And the title of the reflection is, wait for it, is The Elephant Rope. All right, so I'll give you a second to write that down. I don't see everybody writing, so I'm assuming you're really fast or don't have a pen. Get in there? All right. All right. So, again, this is going to tie into, it may not make as much sense now, kind of why I'm doing this one, until you hear the story about tonight's saint. And so I'm going to read this. So, again, the elephant rope. So, a gentleman was walking through an elephant camp at the circus, and he spotted that the elephants weren't being kept in cages, they're held by the use of chains. All that was holding them back from escaping the camp was a small piece of rope tied to one of their legs. As the man gazed upon the elephants, he was completely confused as to why the elephants didn't just use their strength to break the rope and escape the camp. They could easily have done so, but instead they didn't try to at all. Curious and wanting to know the answer, he asked a trainer nearby why the elephants were just standing there and never tried to escape. The trainer replied, "When they are very young and much smaller, we use the same size rope to tie them, and at that age, it's enough to hold them. As they grow up, they are conditioned to believe that they cannot break away. They believe the rope can still hold them, so they never try to break free. The only reason that the elephants weren't breaking free and escaping from the camp was that over time they adopted the belief that it just wasn't possible." So what's the moral of the story? No matter how much the world tries to hold you back, always continue with the belief that what you want to achieve is possible. Believing you can become successful is the most important step in actually achieving it. Just spend a few minutes reflecting on that, and then maybe ask Jesus in the tabernacle, how does that relate to my life? What's holding me back? A couple quick things before we get started. So, just so that nobody can say that it snuck up on me, Lent starts a week from today with Ash Wednesday. And so, sometimes I think, when Lent rolls around, I think we kind of wake up, we go, oh my gosh, I forgot I got to give something up. What am I going to give up? Let's see, what's easy? And I think we need to, put a little more thought into it. And I've been hearing more people talk about this year, about the fact that we need to kind of be thinking about this and be intentional about what we're doing for Lent this year. And not only do we want to give something up, but it's always good, when you give something up, that usually it means it leaves room for something else. So for instance, when you go to confession, right, you get rid of all the junk. Well, that leaves room for something else. And so God gives you grace. But if you don't, accept his grace and you just kind of fall back in your sin, well, then all the bad stuff just kind of backfills in for what you're doing. So by picking something that's not super hard, but maybe that's a challenge, can be really good for us because it helps give us some discipline. So maybe it's, like if I'm sitting here and going, well, I think I'm going to give up liver and onions for Lent this year. Well, I hate liver and onions. So, so what? So I give up something I hate, so I could check a box and I could say, all right, I gave something up. But, it's not something that I'm going to miss or not something that challenges me to become a better version of myself. So I, like the time that we were spending here for like we were only in silence for 7 minutes. Okay, and I know for some of you guys it seemed like an eternity. But, you know, spending that time in silence and say, okay, God, what do you see in my life that can help me become a better person? Right? And so, you know, maybe I need to give up, snacking in between meals. Maybe I need to give up soda. Maybe I need to give up, time on the internet. Something that's going to be a challenge, right? I've been thinking about this. There's a few things in my life I'd like to do, but what I want to mostly do is I want to be more disciplined in the good things that I'm supposed to do. So for instance, spending time in prayer. I'm trying to be really intentional about that. And I even started like on Monday, I'm going in, I'm going to spend time in the church every day. And if I can't be in the church, I'm going to do it at home. And I'm just going to be even if it's 10 minutes, just something so that I get in a routine. Because one of the things the devil hates the most is a disciplined Catholic. Because it's harder to pull us away if we've got a routine and a discipline that's helping us become better. All right, so think about what that might be for you. So consider giving something up. Some of you guys and girls, maybe you spend a lot of time online. Maybe you spend a lot of time with your phones in your hand. Maybe say to yourself, I'm only gonna spend time on my phone, like at 7 o'clock at night, it's off, it's done. Something like that. Like one thing I'm considering doing, a friend of mine has been doing this, and he's a pretty big dude. And I don't know how much weight he's lost, but it's noticeable. And he probably is pushing 500 pounds. And he's noticeably lost weight. And so what he's doing is he's only eating like between the hours of noon and 6. And the rest of the time he only has water. And so it's this fasting that does it. And so he's still eating in between there. But it's something that we do to train ourselves to become better person who we are. Go on. Yeah, it can be, fasting can be what you want it to be. Some people do water fasts. I've known people that do like a water fast for 3 days. What's that? Only drink water, right? And there's a certain regimen that you can do that, and it can help you. But pick what it is, and pick the thing that you like. If you are saying to yourself, oh, donuts, I love donuts. You say, all right, what would my life be without donuts? It'd be living heck, right? But so maybe that's the thing you need to give up, because it makes you think about it. So when you walk by and somebody's got donuts and you're like, can't have that, right? It makes you make a decision to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And those little, you're not going to die if you don't get a donut, right? But those little decisions, those little times we do that can really help us grow in holiness. And so that when we have to give up something bigger, we can do that. Okay. So remember then, it's, with Lent coming up and Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, it's fasting, meaning one meal of a regular sized meal and 2 smaller meals. And I can never remember. I think that's the fasting and abstinence is for if you're 18, and I think just the no meat on Fridays is if you're 14. But look it up, because I can never remember which is which. But yeah, no meat on Fridays. And really, we're supposed to give up something every Friday. And in the Catholic Church, it was like that until like the 60s. And then they said, maybe there's more virtue. And because if somebody's a vegetarian, they go, I'm giving up meat on Friday. Well, they've done nothing. Right? And so by doing something of their choosing, like we do during Lent, that is a challenge for them. It honors the sacrifice that Christ made for us, which was on a Friday. So historically, that's why we've done that. So we need to reclaim Fridays as a day of penance. And again, it doesn't have to be that you're doing bread and water fasts. You could, but just something that helps you bring to mind the sacrifice that Jesus did for us. Go on. You can. I mean, Sunday is a typical day where it's a celebration, because it's like every Sunday is a little Easter. And so Sunday, typically you don't fast. That doesn't mean you can't, but it's not a penitential day like a Friday is. And sometimes a lot of people fast on Wednesdays as well. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be food. It could be, like I said, time online, time for television, But then, like I said, do something else with that time that's productive. Steve.
I think all the kids should go to phones.
What you said?
That was a tough one.
Yeah. That would be, but maybe give up video games. I mean, something that's a little bit hard. so that when you want to do it, you're like, oh yeah, and then you remember. And so it's to draw us back to Jesus. Okay? So, any questions on that though? All right, so, because be careful. I did that one year where I woke up on Ash Wednesday morning, like, oh no, I didn't pick something, and all of a sudden God said, no caffeine for Lent. And I'm like, no, you don't. And I said, well, let's see how long this lasts. And I made it the whole Lent without caffeine. So giving up soda or giving up coffee, or like if you're a coffee drinker like me and you can't stand the taste of coffee and so you put a ton of creamer in it, I'll drink a whole lot less coffee when I don't put creamer in it. Because it's like, whoa, I don't like the taste of it. All right, so something that brings your mind back to, that helps you discipline. All right. We're going to talk about Saint Damien of Molokai. And so let's start with a prayer today. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the life of Saint Damien of Molokai. We ask that you send him here this evening so that as we learn about his life, he can help each of us take a piece of his life and learn about it and incorporate it into who we are. We ask that you give us hope. We ask that you give us perseverance this Lent. And most of all, we ask that you continue to draw us to yourself. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, so Saint Damien of Molokai. So that's not his real name. He was born Jozef de Veuster in a little town called Leuven, near Leuven, in Belgium. And I don't know how much you guys know about Belgium. Belgium's capital is Antwerp, and just near that is a town called Leuven. And so he was born near there. And he was his family were farmers. They weren't super rich. They weren't super poor. They were just kind of in between. He was the seventh of 8 children. He was the youngest boy. And, pretty normal boy. He was born January 3rd in 1840. Okay, and so this is Europe in 1840. And when he was 3 or 4 years old, one of his older sisters went off to the convent to become a nun. And, they were a pretty devout Catholic family. And this was, a lot of people had family members that went off to the convent or became priests. And so by the time he was probably 8, 9 years old, his sister was tending to some people who had gotten sick during a typhus outbreak, and she got sick and died. And this affected him because he lost one of his older sisters, but the other thing that affected him greatly was that one of his younger sisters, who was of age, said, I'm going to go replace the sister who died. I'm going to take her place because, God's got something in store for me there. And so this left a big impression on Jozef, and it'll factor in importantly in a few minutes. And so as he grew up, he had a brother whose name was Auguste, and he was about 4 years older than Jozef. And when Auguste was about 16, 17, he went off to become a priest. He was in an order, so there was an order. It was the Congregation of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, and so he went off to to start seminary. And this Jozef and Auguste, they were pretty close, and so Jozef was like I said, he was a normal kid. He didn't really give too much thought about being a priest at this point in time, but like I said, he did have some inklings that he kind of wanted to be like his older brother. During this time, like I said, he got into the same kind of mischief, maybe different kinds of mischief, but he got into mischief as a young man, as a teenager. One of the things that they liked to do is, of course, there's no automobiles, there was horse-drawn carts, and one of the things that they would do is they would jump onto these moving carts, and then somebody would throw a rock at the horse would bolt, and they'd get this fast ride on a cart. And by the time that the rider steadied the cart, they would jump off and run away. Well, one time, this happened, and Jozef fell off, and he fell down into the dirt, and the cart ran over his head. And his brother Auguste later said he should have died, but somehow the ground must have been soft enough. The cart went right over his head, wheel went right over his head, and he was fine. So something protected him during that time. Another time he did that, and the horse failed to bolt. when they threw the rocks at the horse. And so the guy who was driving the cart turned around, saw who it was, says, I know your parents, I'm going to tell them. Well, he jumps off and he runs to the church. And he had heard that, if you go into the church, it's like sanctuary, and they can't do anything to you. It's like base, right? You can't do anything to me here. And so his parents found out he was in the church, and he wouldn't leave the church because he's like, I'm not leaving the church until you promise not to punish me. And so they somehow got him out of the church. I don't remember if they punished him or not, but he had this idea of the sanctity and the protection of the church at that point in time. So when he was 13 years old, they needed a little bit more help on the farm, and so he left school to help out a little bit more on the farm. And so with all the work that he was doing, he became a pretty strong young man. In fact, they said by the time he was 13 or 14 years old, he could carry 100-kilo bags of grain. So a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So do the math. He was able to carry 220-pound bags of grain on his shoulders at 13 years old. So he was, and he did it. They said he did it with ease. So he was a lot of help around the farm. But his father wanted to do well by the family, and so he decided by the time that Jozef was 16, he's like, I'm going to send you off to business school because I want you to come back and be able to help us run the farm, and then when you take over the farm, you'll know what to do. And so he sent them off to a school that was close to the French border, and so it was more of a French-speaking area of Belgium. And Jozef went there, and he struggled a little bit because they didn't know French, right? They knew, I don't know, what's the language of Belgium? Flemish, maybe? He knew something like that, so it's closer to German. But he struggled a little bit, but he got to know French as time went on. And during that time, when he was maybe 17 years old, he was at church, and there was a Redemptorist priest who was giving a mission. And so he gave this mission, and Jozef was kind of like, wow, this sounds really good. I kind of want to be like that. And my brother Auguste, who was also a priest, he's like, me and Auguste, we could be priests together. And so he kind of wrote home and he said, I kind of would like to go off and be a Trappist monk or be part of this order that Auguste is part of. And so his parents never really had considered that for him, but they went along with it. And so he joins the order, enters the order at 18, but they didn't admit him as someone to go into the seminary. They said that you can join, but as a lay brother. And he was like, well, this is my way in, and so he decided to do it. So his brother, who had taken the name Father Pamphile, and I don't know anything about Saint Pamphile, but they usually took the name of another saint, was tutoring him. And he would read him Latin, and Jozef wasn't real good at Latin, but he got better at it. So much better that by the time he's about like 18, 19 years old, his brother, Father Pamphile, goes to the superiors and says, he's pretty good at this. He's getting good. He says, maybe you ought to give him a try. And the superiors, kind of questioned him a little bit. It turned out he was getting better at it. So they said, okay, we'll admit you to the seminary. And so this is when he took his vows when he was 18. And by the time he was 19 or 20, he was in the formal training in the seminary. So he and Pamphile are both priests in this congregation of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary. And so in about 1863, Damian's about 23 years old. He's been studying. He's due to be ordained in about a year or so. The government in Hawaii had been asking for missionaries to come over because they weren't part of a formal diocese, so they were still accepting missionary priests. And so they asked this congregation, can you send priests? And so they assigned Father Pamphile to do this. Well, a couple weeks before he's getting ready to go, Father Pamphile catches typhus, which is what their sister caught, and so he was unable to go. And so Jozef, who had taken the name Damian when he took his vows, he's like, I'm gonna be like my sister, and I'm gonna replace Pamphile. And so rather than going to the leader of the order, he went right to the bishop. And he wrote this, and the bishop said, sure, that sounds good to me. Well, the order priest, the head of the order, found out about this, and he was like, that's fine. The bishop has the authority. But next time, observe the chain of command. Don't do an end run around me and go ask, what can be done, because, he doesn't know what's going on in the workings of the order. But this showed the ambition that Damian had, that he that he really wanted to go out and he wanted to save souls for Christ. So in about November of 1863, he leaves for Hawaii. And again, so literally, if you're looking at the globe, Belgium's here and Hawaii's here. They're on it's on about the furthest away as you can get on the other side of the world. And so again, 1863, there's no planes, it's basically ship. And so he's got a 5-month journey on a ship to get over there. And so they sail west, they sail down around Cape Horn in South America, and then northward to Hawaii. And again, this is before the Panama Canal was there, because that trip would have been a lot shorter had they been able to take that, but the Panama Canal was still about 40 years away. And so anyway, 5 months later, in March of 1864, he lands in Hawaii. He connects with the bishop, and about 2 months later, he gets ordained a priest. And so he winds up being assigned to some mission territory on the Big Island of Hawaii. And so he's there and he's like, evangelizing, and they're setting up churches, and they're doing all sorts of things there. He's there for about 9 years, and he's a pretty scrappy guy still, right? I mean, remember, he can lift these 100-kilo bags of grain. Sometimes they had to go from village to village, and one time they tried to go out in the water, and they had one of those canoes, well, it got capsized, and they barely made it back alive. So he decided, I'm gonna go over land next time. So he's scaling up over volcanic rock mountains and trying to get to the village. And he's tearing up his shoes and tearing up his hands and just getting all tore up doing this, but he's like, I'm doing this as a missionary for Christ. And they were converting a lot of the natives. They saw the zeal that Damian and his fellow priests had, and so they were really starting to save a lot of souls for Christ at that point. Excuse me. So after about 9 years, he's been there, and he winds up. They wind up calling a meeting of all the priests that are there in the order. And the bishop comes and says, we've been granted permission to, if anybody wants to volunteer, to send priests to the leper colony at Molokai. Now, they had established this leper colony in like 1865, 1866, because what had happened is Hawaii had been isolated forever. And then once people started coming, they started bringing diseases that had never been there before, like smallpox and leprosy. And leprosy was really spreading rampantly amongst the native Hawaiians, so much so that they decided they needed to basically exile them to a place where they couldn't, because they didn't really know how it spread. They thought maybe it spread by, aerosol, kind of like they said was the way that COVID spread. It could have spread by touch. It could have spread by, mucus. It could, they just didn't really know. And so basically they said, we're going to exile you to this island, but we're gonna give you supplies, and we're gonna have it be like a settlement. Well, like many things that the government attempts to do, they failed miserably at it, and basically it was a failure from almost the beginning as far as what they intended to set up and what actually got set up. And so literally they started, dropping people off. They had to wade ashore, whatever belongings they could carry, they had. They were supposed to deliver supplies about once or twice a month, and they said they were lucky to get them every 2 months. And after a while, after just a few years, the place was just in total anarchy. There was nobody really leading things. When supplies would come, the stronger people would take it from the weaker people, and they were exiling children, without their parents. They were just so afraid of this disease, they were just exiling whoever. And they literally would take children from their mothers and they put them on this ship and they would send them off to Molokai, or mothers from their families or parents or whoever. If you exhibited any of the symptoms, they would take you and they would send you to exile. And so, not a good situation at all. And so they had tried to build a little church, but they never really established a priest there, and so it just kind of was there. And it was, like I said, it was just total anarchy. The people that were there, what little lumber they had, maybe they were able to cobble together some kind of huts. Otherwise, it was basically branches and, grass and leaves and things like that. And it was ridiculous what was going on there. So this is a situation that Damian comes into on May 10th of 1873. And he arrives and he's just like, he feels really called to do this. And when the bishop had this meeting before, he basically said, we're not going to tell anybody they got to go. Are there any volunteers? And 4 priests stood up. And they said Damian was the first one to stand up. And so they said, okay, what we're going to do is you 4 priests, we're going to rotate you every 3 months. Make sure you don't touch anybody. Make sure any food that you eat is something that you've prepared for yourself. Just keep your distance. No changing their bandages. Just, do what you need to do, but from a distance. And, right from the get-go, Damian's like, this is not right. These people need more than this. And there was always this feeling like they were in pretty good shape over in Molokai. Damian gets there, and it's abysmal. It's just abysmal what's going on there. And so the first thing he does is he goes in and he sees the church, and the church is only like 10 years old, and it looks like it's been there for 100 years. It's just in total disrepair. He goes and he cleans up the church and he starts having Mass. And a few people come and they attend Mass there with him. But he just had this way about him where he was just very welcoming. And so he started, he was kind of violated what they told him to do. They said, don't touch anybody. He would go and he would start changing their bandages because there was nobody to do it. There was nobody, no doctors, there was no nurses. The ones that had come maybe stayed for a little bit and then they left. And so there was nobody to take care of these people. And so he starts doing this. And so he starts caring for them. And, I watched a movie on him called Molokai, and it shows him, and he's just literally nursing. He's changing their bandages. He's, they're getting ready to die, and he's got them on his shoulder, and he's walking them to death. He's trying to have them get the last sacraments. And people see this, and they realize that he's just loving them. And it starts to give them a little bit of hope. And that's the thing that they had been lacking so much, is hope. And so think back to the reflection that we just did, that the elephant, he lost sense of hope that he could break away with that little rope. Okay, and that's what these settlers, these outcasts were like. They had lost all hope. There was no supplies coming in. They had inadequate housing. They had given them some farm tools. But part of leprosy is that the nerve endings in your fingers and your toes and your nose and your extremities, kind of dies. You can't feel anything, to the point where sometimes your fingers like fall off or get amputated. They get so infected they have to amputate them. And so a lot of people have kind of like these hands like this. Well, they can't farm. They can't build houses. They can't do anything, other than just kind of exist. And so they had lost all hope. Well, by Damian coming, he gives them hope back that they can do things. So there was, they were talking about how there was times when they would start to help him. So he would go to fix the church. He would like scramble up on the roof, and he would just go up there and be doing stuff. Well, they couldn't hold tools. So what they do is they take a hammer and they would strap it to their arm, and then they could use a hammer. They were becoming motivated to want to help because he was showing them that these things were possible to do. And so they would help, and they became part of, they would be servers at Mass, and they started a choir, and they did all these things. And they started, again, to just have more and more hope. And eventually, they had to add on to the church a couple of times because so many people were coming. And when he arrived, there was like 700 people. They said at one point there was over 1,000 people, and over 600 or 700 of them had converted to Catholicism because of Damian. Some of them were kind of deathbed confessions because he would walk them to death. And just, be with them and ask them, I need you to ask for absolution. I need you to request the sacraments, because he didn't want to force it on them. And they would do this. And, again, this is the life expectancy of these people was like 4 or 5 years. By the time the disease kind of got to the more advanced stages, 4 or 5 years, that was pretty much it for most of the people. And so they said at one point he had between 190 and 200 people per year on average dying. Okay, and so what they used to do, they didn't have any way to because again they can't dig holes because they can't grip anything. So they would either bury these people in shallow graves, and then the wild pigs or the wild dogs would come and dig them up and eat the bodies. That was gross. Or they would take them over to the edge of the cliff and they just drop them over the edge of the cliff, and the wild pigs and the wild dogs would eat the bodies down there. They just didn't have any way to really even deal with the bodies. But Damian knew that he needed to give them a decent burial. And so he started taking some of the lumber that they got, he would build caskets. And he would then dig graves. And he would give them a proper burial. Again, do the math. 190, 200 people a year, you're talking on average about, every other day. He's got to do a funeral, build a casket, dig a grave, and put this in. And if you go to the site today, you can see it on air photography, there's the church, and then there's this area that's surrounded by a stone fence. It's the enormous area. And it's all the grave markers were wiped out in a tsunami in the 40s. But it's this huge area, and he buried a lot of those people that were in there, right? So he was there for 16 years, times 200, that's over 3,000 people that he buried. Okay, and people started helping, but he did the lion's share of that work, in addition to the other things he was doing. He was helping them build homes. He was helping them, they did start cultivating sweet potatoes, and they would sell those back to the government, and they would be able to earn some money to buy more materials. So he started giving their life purpose and started making them realize that things were possible. So in 1881, so he'd been there at this point for 8 years, he had been writing letters to his brother, Father Pamphile, in Belgium. Well, Father Pamphile was putting them into the newsletter for the congregation. Well, then these are being picked up by the newspapers, and people in Europe were becoming outraged. They started sending money, started demanding things of the government there, all sorts of things. And his superiors and the governor started accusing him of being a rabble-rouser, trying to stir up trouble. He's like, I wrote some letters to my brother, and he got out what's going on. And there were people that were earmarking money to go to him. Well, for a while, both the church there and the government were intercepting that money and using it for other things. And it wasn't getting to the colonies. Because they kept saying, oh, Damian, he's exaggerating. It's not as bad as he says. And people would go there like, you're right, it's worse. It's much worse than he's even telling them what's going on there. And so things slowly started getting better. But the turning point when things really started getting better is in 1881, as I started to say, is, I'm going to butcher her name, Princess Lili Uokalani. She decided she was going to make a visit. She had heard about this, and she's like, my people are dying. I'm going to go visit the leper colony. And this is a big no-no for, you're not supposed to go to a leper colony, but she says, I'm going to do it anyway. And she goes there and she sees the terrible conditions. And this is after Damian had made improvements for 8 years. But in the makeshift hospital that they have, the people were basically lying on straw on the floor. And they had no clean bandages. There was nobody to take care of them other than Damian and a few of the people who were less sick. And she was just like, this is not okay. And so she makes a promise that we're going to start doing things. So eventually they got lumber so they could build beds. One of the things that Damian had been praying for, been asking for repeatedly, is he says, I need some nuns who are nursing nuns, and I need them to come help me. And I also need another priest here because I need someone to hear my confession. And so this is a real struggle for him. There's two things he really struggled with, well, three things really, that he really struggled with. One was, in the situation he's in, and we talked about this like with St. Vincent de Paul last time, is when you see these conditions day after day after day, this starts to wear on you, right? And so he suffered with like depression and, just really, even times hopelessness. Even though he was bringing hope to these people, there was times when he struggled with this. The second thing he struggled with, which I started to say, was that, somebody hears confession, and so he would just sometimes just get on a ship and go to Honolulu and they'd be like, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in exile. He's like, I need someone to hear my confession. Honolulu is like about 100 miles away, but he's making his way there. Another time, they were asking a priest to go to the island and nobody would go. So the bishop went on a ship. And the bishop, said, okay, I need to go hear this man's confession. And the ship captain says, you don't have a landing pass. So if you get off the ship, you're not getting back on. And he says, well, then let him come up here. He says, no, if he tries to get on the ship, we're going to shoot him. And so basically, Damian's down here in a boat, and then you got the ship, and the bishop's up here. And so Damian is shouting his confession in French to the bishop, who also knew French. Nobody else knew French. So he's just like screaming his confession up to the bishop, just to be able to be heard, have his confession heard. And he's like, it's like 8 months to a year between his confessions, and this is driving him crazy. Because the other thing he struggled with is the reason he joined the order priest is because of the companionship of the brothers. And so that you would have that camaraderie, you'd be able to have your confession heard, you'd have all this type of stuff. And he was by himself. I mean, he was with 1,000 other people, right? But he was by himself spiritually. He didn't have the benefit of the people around him that he was hoping to have. And so mentally, he had all these struggles going on at this time. Eventually in about 1884, it's apparent that he has the early signs of leprosy. There was a doctor that would come occasionally, and he tested him, and he stuck a needle in his foot, and he couldn't feel it. He actually ran electric shock through there, and he couldn't feel that either. And that's one of the signs of leprosy, is that the nerve endings die. And so you start to have, like I said, things falling off. And they would have these makeshift bandages, and just really started these struggles. Well, he realizes that he had 12 years where he didn't have leprosy, and he always said that he hadn't got it because of the grace of God. But now he realized he had this cross, and he said, okay, Lord, thank you for the years that you've given me. Now help me bear this cross. And so, because what his concern was is that who's going to take care of them when I'm gone? I mean, at one point he had kind of had his grave marked out, which was under a tree, which he had slept under the first night that he was there. But he was thinking, when I die later on, because God's going to keep me alive. But his concern was is that who's going to watch after these people? Who's going to do this when I'm gone? And so became more and more fervent. I need nuns here. We need to get priests. We need to get more people here to help out. And so in 1883, he had heard about this Sister Marianne Cope, who had come to the islands, and she was from a group of nuns that were nurses, and they were going to come, but the government would not let them go to Molokai. They said, we're going to set up a hospital in Honolulu. We want you to do that here. And she's like, okay, well, we really came to go to the island to help out Father Damian. And they're like, no, we're not going to let you go, because we're not going to let you go and become sick too. So they set up this hospital, and Father Damian had been to Honolulu once or twice. He had met Sister Marianne, and he would just kind of ask her, be praying about this so that maybe someday you can come help out. And so in 1886, another gentleman shows up on the scene. His name was Ira Dutton. And Ira was a Civil War veteran. He actually, when he was young, his family moved to Janesville, Wisconsin. And he grew up in Janesville. And he was with the Wisconsin 13th Infantry during the Civil War. He was a captain. And he was a pretty solid guy. Right after the war, though, he married a woman, and it turned out that she basically took all his money and then left with another guy. And this kind of sent him into a spiral. And he spent the next 10, 12 years as an alcoholic. And just, his life was just going nowhere. Well, eventually he just kind of woke up one day and says, this is enough. And he went cold turkey, and he found the Catholic faith, and he converted. In fact, he went down to Kentucky to study to become a Trappist monk down there, and they would have made him a monk, but he felt like his life had been so miserable, he wanted to do penance, and he had heard about this Father Damian. And so he contacted the government over there, and they said, yeah, come on over. And for some reason, they let him go over to Molokai. So he arrives there in July of 1886 and shows up, and he basically, Father Damian at this point, the disease was becoming more advanced, and and he had taken the name Jozef as his confirmation name, and so Damian called him Brother Jozef. And he said, okay, yeah, I would love the help. And so Damian gave him a ton to do. But this guy was also a cook. He knew culinary. He was really good at cleanliness, and so he really cleaned up the place a lot and helped with the cleanliness in the area, helped with the cleanliness in the hospital as well. And so he became Damian's right-hand man. And so this really helped him out a lot. Well, as the disease advanced, by late 1888, finally, Sister Marianne Cope had gotten permission to come over to help out on Molokai. And so her and 5 other nuns, they come over to become nurses in the hospital. And in this movie that I watched, it just kind of shows them kind of come in, and they're like, this is worse than we thought. And Sister Marianne was, she was talking with Father Damian. She's like, we've been asking to come over here for years, and, they told us conditions weren't that bad, and we just didn't know, please forgive me. And, he's like, you didn't know. He says, I'm overjoyed because now I know that somebody's going to be able to be here to take care of these people once I'm gone. Because he knew he was going to die. He could hardly get around anymore at this point in time. So this is November of 1888. And if you look in your workbook there, you can see some pictures of him. And the one on the prayer card there too is the same pictures in the lower corner there. In that picture, he is about 48 years old. He looks like he's about 108 years old in that picture. That's the disease just wasted him. It turned out when he got leprosy, he got the worst form of it. Okay, and so it really took its toll on his body. And so in April, on Monday of Holy Week, April 15th in 1889, Sister Marianne was sitting at his bedside, and he says, I know that I'm going to be spending Easter in heaven. And a short time later, he died. And that picture that you can see on page 101 there, that's a picture of him just a few days before his death. He's just totally incapacitated at that point in time from the disease. And so at that point then, more help started arriving because word had kind of gotten out that conditions were bad. And so what he started really carried on after he left. So his case for sainthood didn't come up until, it had been there, but because he was such a controversial guy, because, the government and some of the church hierarchy on the island said one thing, but the truth was really another thing. It was a while. And so there was a letter that a nun named Mother Teresa wrote to John Paul II in May of 1984. And she said, in order to continue this beautiful work of love and healing, we need a saint to lead and protect us. Father Damian can be this saint. Holy Father, our lepers and everyone on earth beg you to give us a saint, a martyr to love, an example of obedience to our religion. And so I'm sure there's other patron saints of leprosy, but she wanted him to be the patron saint of what they were trying to do in her Missionaries of Charity. So Mother Teresa is pushing for his sainthood. Okay. And so a point I want to make is that saints attract other saints. And so this Sister Marianne Cope, she was canonized in 2012. She's a saint also. Ira Dutton, Brother Jozef, his case for canonization was opened in December of 2015. And 3 months ago in November, they just advanced his case. He's now servant of God. They said that there's cause to make him a saint as well. And now you got Mother Teresa pushing for him. She's a saint, right? And she's writing to John Paul II. And so the point is that saints don't get to heaven by themselves. Okay? And that's why it's so important, these stories of the saints that we're telling you guys, is because, especially you guys who are getting ready to be confirmed, you're picking confirmation saints. This isn't just, whoever, Sebastian, because I like sports, That's not what this is about, right? You're supposed to discern who it is that is supposed to help walk you to heaven. And so picking a saint, that's how I did mine. I'm like, is there a saint named Stephen? Yes, that's my guy. That's my whole discernment of my confirmation saint. But you need to pick somebody that's like, I can have a relationship with this person. I can learn about him. I can learn from him or her, right? But not only that, I can ask this person to intercede for me and help get me to heaven. Okay, and so that's why it's so important, these stories of the saints. That's why I'm recording these, so that you guys can go back and maybe listen. Maybe you're like, oh, there's this one saint we talked about, Father Damian. I don't remember much about him. You can go back and you can listen, about his life, and you can say, there's something about him. And so there, in fact, I remember when we gave this talk in 2009, my son was going through confirmation at the time. He picked Damian. He had just been ordained in 2009. He picked Damian as his patron saint for confirmation. So that also, parents, this gives you someone to pray to for your kid, when they're maybe not doing what they should be doing. You can pray to their patron saints, and they will help you out. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons. This isn't just something to fill time. These saints they're heroes of our faith, but they're also people that are going to walk with us to get us to heaven. Okay, so that's this idea that saints attract other saints. Your confirmation patron saint is going to be somebody who attracts you and brings you to heaven as well. All right. You guys have any other questions? All right, so we're going to be done just a couple minutes early. If you guys want to sit here in the church, you're welcome to. Like I said, maybe pray about who the saint's going to be. I'm going to send out, for all those in confirmation, I'm going to send out the link to the YouTube page again. Right now, after this one gets posted, we'll have 9 or 10 saints that'll be up there from the Saints Alive. There's a few other ones in the high school one in case you want to learn about some other saints. But, look in our library. I got this book out of our library here. It's like a little 64-page book. It's awesome, right? I learned a ton about Damian from this. And so just, go in our library and look at that too. But, search online. Use the internet for something good. Go on there and go, patron saints, enter your birthday, patron saints for the day of your birth. Mine's St. Agnes. I'm like, let me learn about St. Agnes, but figure out who that is and just start doing some research on these saints. And I always tell people that the saint picks you, you don't pick the saint. So maybe there's something in one of these talks that's kind of sparked your interest. You want to learn more about them, and maybe that's the saint calling you to try and be part of the people that they are praying for. All right? The mystery of the rosary that we're covering with Damian is the ascension of Jesus into heaven. We're into the glorious mysteries, and the fruit of the mystery for that is hope. And you can try and bring faith to a people, but one thing Damian did is he had to instill hope in them first. And he showed them that through Christ. And so, you could sit here and you could tell them the truth about Jesus all day long, but if you don't instill some sort of hope in them that life has a chance of getting better, they're not gonna take your word for it. And so that's what he was able to do through his example. And he would show them that, hey, we can work and do this. There was another thing that they did is they actually wound up cultivating sweet potatoes, and they'd sell them back to the mainland so they could earn money to buy things. They were afraid to touch the people, but they weren't afraid to touch the potatoes that the people had made, that they had grown. But he gave them hope. And I think that's the thing that is the most lacking in society right now. And I think as a couple of you were asking your petitions about despair and anxiety, that's the loss of hope. And so I think sometimes we just have to try and maybe we got to say it to ourselves 100 times, or maybe we got to find all those citations in the Bible that say, do not be afraid. But at some point we have to find some hope, or have somebody show us some hope. And my prayer for you is that in the life of Damian, and I would encourage you to watch this movie, but I would also encourage you, I had a little book that I promptly lost, which was a really good book on him. It was in the library here. It was just a little 64-page book on him. But he just had a tenacity about him that just, a determination that you just knew that anything was possible. He would work from sunup till midnight, and he would tend to so many things. It was almost like there was 5 of them, but there wasn't. He just worked hard, and he just kept his faith, and he lit people up because they were able to get a little bit of hope, and that got them to be able to do things that previously they weren't able to do. And like the church attendance was just crazy how many people were coming to church after that, and that's because he gave them hope. And so try to find the sources of hope in your life, of true hope, not false hope in earthly things, and that type of thing, but the hope that Christ brings, whether it's spending time here in the church, or whether that's, in time with the Word, or just in time with prayer, but something to try and bolster our hope, because I think that's, once we lose hope, then lots of other things get lost too. So I think that's the first thing that we all have to do, no matter where we are, is to try to gain some hope back. And through the lives of saints like St. Damian, it's possible to do that.